Howdy folks, I'm Ben Starr, the ultimate food geek. Welcome back to my kitchen. Today we are talking key lime pie because it is the armpit of summer outside and it's 120,000 degrees and everybody is looking for desserts that cool us off. Now, I am known on YouTube as the guy that takes complicated recipes and makes them much, much simpler. But we have the reverse problem going on with key lime pie because most of the versions out there are actually too simple. A pre-made store-bought graham cracker crust that tastes like cardboard, a can of sweetened condensed milk, and half a cup of plastic bottle lime juice stirred together, poured into the crust, then put it in your fridge for an hour and it's ready to go. And I'm sorry folks, I know that that works and produces something that is technically classified as edible, but it's not good. So today I am going to teach you how I make my key lime pie, which is relatively famous. We're still keeping it fairly on the simple side, but we're going as homemade as is humanly possible, and the difference in flavor is striking. Now, if you go down to the Florida Keys, which is where key limes are grown, and thus key lime pie references that, the locals will be adamant in telling you that key lime pie was invented in the Florida Keys. But a few years back, a chef was doing a little bit of research and published some information that led the world to believe that key lime pie was actually invented in a test kitchen for the Borden Company, manufacturers of sweetened condensed milk, in their test kitchen in New York City, basically as a ploy to sell more sweetened condensed milk. This information has proliferated across the internet, and even if you read Wikipedia, it will probably lead you to believe that, yes, key lime pie was invented in New York City. It wasn't. I found a wonderfully researched and well-documented article from a weekly rag down in the Florida Keys that actually proves that key lime pie was being served in restaurants in the Florida Keys as early as 1919. Way before Borden ever had a test kitchen. The article is a fantastic read and I will link to it in the video description below. Just click where it says more if you would like to read proof that key lime pie originated in the Florida Keys. But key lime pie is just a regional variation of the whole icebox pie thing, the pies that you don't really have to bake. You stir them together, put them in the fridge, and they stay there until you're ready to eat. Probably the most important decision you will have to make when you set out to make a key lime pie is what type of lime or lime product are you going to use. And I'm going to be honest, 9 times out of 10, even down in the Florida Keys, when somebody makes this pie, they use this stuff. Nellie and Joe's famous Key West lime juice. Comes in a plastic bottle and you can find it at almost any supermarket anywhere in the country. But folks, just like every other shelf-stable citrus product that exists out there, this stuff's nasty. It smells like cleaning solution and it tastes like a bottle. But once you've mixed it with a lot of sweet, sugary milk, is it going to make that much of a difference? Well, yeah, it certainly makes an edible pie, but using fresh limes is a much better decision. Primarily because we have access to the zest, or the flavorful outer rind. This stuff amps up your flavor like you would not believe. So even if you are resorting to the bottled stuff, I recommend you pick up at least 1 lime to get the zest off of it and put that into your mix. Now, of course, the question is, key limes or regular limes, or Persian limes as they're usually referred to. This is definitely not a question if you are in the Florida Keys, where they will string you up by your toenails, tar and feather you if you try to use Persian limes instead of key limes in key lime pie. In fact, is it even key lime pie if you use Persian limes? That's all just semantics, and I'm going to be honest with you, I more often reach for Persian limes when I'm making this recipe than for the key limes. And the simple reason is that zesting all of these tiny itty-bitty little limes on my microplane to get the zest makes my hand cramp up and hurt for a couple of days afterwards. But we are going to do a direct taste test here just to make sure that we are not missing something. Because the internets will tell you that key limes have a distinctly different flavor than Persian limes. I'm going to start with the familiar Persian lime. Quite good. Now I'm going to go with the key lime. Of course, we've got seeds in the key lime that need to be strained out, but that won't stop me from taste testing it. So, the flavor is certainly different. The key lime is more acidic than the Persian lime. That will make the resulting pie more tart, or we just need to use less lime juice to accommodate the same amount of flavor and tartness. But I'm going to be honest that the Persian lime had actually a more complex flavor to it. The key lime was fairly one note other than being more tart. So you certainly have my blessing to use Persian limes in this recipe, They're easier to zest, you have to squeeze fewer of them to get the required amount of juice, and they actually make a product that's a little bit more flavorful and complex. There is one other lime that is worth mentioning here, and it might be worth you searching out, or you may already have access to it. I grow them in my backyard. That is the Thai lime, sometimes called the makrut lime, and historically it was called the kaffir lime. However, that term appears to have some problematic racist origins, so that term is being canceled, and now we're just calling them Thai limes or makrut limes. These are the limes that are used in the cuisines of Southeast Asia, and the tree is kept predominantly for its leaves, which are extremely aromatic and are a foundational ingredient in the curries of Southeast Asia. I keep a Thai lime tree specifically for its leaves, but I also get a crop of the limes themselves once, sometimes twice a year, and these limes are exquisite. Now, this one is a little bitty baby. A mature Thai lime falls somewhere in size between the key lime and the Persian lime. It has a noticeably wrinkly skin, which gets much more accentuated as the lime grows and becomes more mature. And just like the leaves of this tree, the rind and the juice of the Thai lime is exceptionally aromatic. It's very, very floral in an ethereal sort of way. So I love adding the zest and juice of one of these Thai limes to my recipe. I once made the mistake of using all Thai limes in the recipe, and that resulting pie was too perfumey for most of the people that ate it. I loved it and thought it was delicious, but some folks thought that they were eating perfume. But the zest and juice of just one of these babies goes an extraordinarily long way into making a really distinctive key lime pie. Specialty markets often carry this, and it can be reasonably easy to find at Asian supermarkets as well. Or if you got a foodie friend that really likes to make Thai food, they may have a tree in their backyard. You can also ask at your favorite Thai restaurant where they get their lime leaves, because where there are leaves, there is also fruit. The tree is also beautiful and evergreen. I keep mine in a pot. It lives in the garage during the winter, and it gives me leaves and fruit all the time that I use very frequently. All right, let's get into it. I am preheating my oven to 375 degrees Fahrenheit to bake my crust. And speaking of crust, virtually all key lime pies made in the modern era are served in a graham cracker crust. Now, the problem with that is that store-bought graham cracker crust tastes like cardboard, and at the risk of being a little unpopular, graham crackers sort of taste like cardboard. I mean, really folks, the graham cracker was invented to be utterly boring, to literally suck all of the joy out of life. I'm not joking. The graham cracker was invented by a Presbyterian minister named Sylvester Graham, and Graham was deeply troubled that boys, when left alone in their bedroom and have a spare sock nearby, end up doing something that made him very uncomfortable. And Graham thought that it was the consumption of delicious, exciting food that triggered this desire in guys to want to self-pleasure. So he invented the cracker to feed to them so that they would be so bored with life that they just wouldn't have the desire to do anything fun. I honestly don't understand why the graham cracker has proliferated to the extent that it has, because it's really boring. So to rescue us from that boring, anti-self-pleasuring legacy, I now make my crusts with Biscoff. You know the little cookies they give you on the airplane that taste really, really good? These are actually fairly natural, at least when compared to most industrially made foods. The ingredients list is wheat flour, sugar, vegetable oil, brown sugar syrup, baking soda, soy flour, salt, and cinnamon. So there aren't even any preservatives in it. And they certainly taste way the heck better than graham crackers. So, Biscoff crust it is. Now, I use my blender to make both the crust and the filling easier to make. If you've got a food processor, it will work just as well. If you don't have either one, you can certainly bash up your crackers by hand inside a Ziploc bag or with a mortar and pestle, however you want to do it. Now, my recipe calls for 11 ounces of Biscoff crumbs. And a package is 8.8 ounces. So you're gonna need 2 packages when you go to the grocery store, but then you got extra Biscoffs to munch on later. Now I am using a scale to weigh my ingredients. If you have one, use it. It will result in less measuring cups to wash, but I'm gonna give you all the volumetric equivalents in case you don't have a scale, so no worries about that. All right, we are looking for 11 ounces of Biscoffs, and that is 1 full package plus 2, 4, 6, 7, 8. 1 package plus 8 cookies will equal the amount you need for this recipe. Now, I am going to grind these up in my blender. All right, now that we've got that down to a fine powder, I'm gonna dump that into a bowl, and I'm just gonna give my blender a quick rinse so that I can use it again when I make the filling. No need to actually wash it out because the ingredients in the crust are gonna be in contact with the filling anyway. All right, you can sort of go through those crumbs, and if you find any pieces that you didn't fully get blended up, just kind of give those a little crush. A little bit of textural variation in the crust is actually quite pleasing, so you don't have to be super anal about this. All right, to our crumbs, we are going to add 3 tablespoons of sugar. I'm not so precise that I measure this out, I just do it with my fingers. We're gonna add about 1 teaspoon of coarse salt or half of a teaspoon of fine salt, like table salt or sea salt. I do find that a perceptible saltiness to the crust contrasts very nicely with the sweet and tart flavors of the filling. So we're gonna get those tossed together. And then we're going to add 6 tablespoons of melted butter. Folks, when we're baking, we always use unsalted butter, and that's because we don't know the exact salt content of any butter, so it's hard for us to control the amount of salt in our recipe. If you only have salted butter, shame on you. That stuff is only for smearing on something you're about to put in your mouth. But for this, just eliminate the salt content in this recipe and use your salted butter. I melted mine in the microwave, and if you usually have problems with butter exploding in the microwave, just cut it into little small pats before it goes into the container, put it in your microwave for 2 minutes, and reduce the power level to 50% of what it normally is. Then it should melt down slowly and without exploding for you. All right, now I'm just gonna get these mixed around with my fingers. Yes, you can do this with a spoon, but it's more fun to do it with your fingers. Now it's time to discuss baking vessels. I bake this in a 9-inch springform pan. I do this primarily for presentation reasons. I can remove the entire pie and display it whole on a really pretty serving tray, and it looks more impressive to dinner guests. Traditionally, this pie is baked in a standard 9-inch pie plate. But my recipe actually produces a little bit more filling than this can accommodate. So if you're gonna use a pie plate, use a deep dish or a 10 or 10.5-inch pie plate, just to make sure you've got enough room for all the filling. If you wanna be super fancy, you can use one of these removable bottom tart shells that gives you a nice fluted edge to the crust. But for me, the 9-inch springform is perfect. Now, I like to line mine with parchment. I always have pre-cut parchment rounds. These are great for all sorts of things. I put them in the bottom of my Dutch oven when I bake bread to make sure that the bread does not stick to the Dutch oven. And of course, I use them for cakes and cheesecakes and pastries all the time. It is not required that you line with parchment. You can spray or butter your baking sheet, but the parchment just gives me extra insurance that I'm not gonna have any issues with the crust sticking. The whole pie will come out of the springform perfectly intact. Now, speaking of that, I also want to line the edges with parchment as well. So I'm going to take sheets of parchment, give a little fold here, and then just cut right down there, just like that. And I'm going to need 2 strips of this to go all the way around my springform. Now, we are going to take our crust crumbs and scatter them fairly evenly across the bottom of the springform until we've used a half, maybe a little bit more than that. And then we are going to take handfuls of the crumbs and sprinkle them along the edge. Those are going to be mashed up to form the sides of the crust. Now, you need to find something in your kitchen that has a flat bottom without too much of a flange across the edge, because this is the tool that we're going to use to press the crusts and form the edges. You don't want the handles to be too long because then that gets a little bit awkward. But this little 1/4 cup measuring cup is perfect for me. So I'm just going to go around the bottom of the crust, pressing it down, and gently tapping the crumbs up onto the side. And then we're going to press firmly on the sides of the crust. Make sure you allow the corner of your measuring cup to get down into the corner of the crust. You don't want it to be unreasonably thick on that corner. So give yourself some bracing on the opposite sides of the pan and go around, compacting those crumbs. Now, don't worry if you've got a different level all the way around. That actually makes this look rustic and beautiful. And then go around and just firm up the very top edge of that crust with some light pressure. And then a final pass just to sort of even everything out. All right, this is going to go into my preheated 375-degree oven for 10 minutes. While our crust is baking, we are going to make the filling. Now when the crust is done in 10 minutes, go ahead and pull it out of the oven and turn the oven down to 325 degrees Fahrenheit, which is the temperature at which our pie will bake. All right, our first ingredient is 2 cans of sweetened condensed milk. Most key lime pie recipes only call for 1, but that doesn't make you very much filling. Make sure you're using sweetened condensed milk and not evaporated milk. They're sold right next to each other in the supermarket, but they are very, very different products. Now this stuff is super thick, so you're definitely gonna need a spatula to rake it out. Again, you can do this in your food processor, or you can just mix it in a bowl. In terms of lime juice, we need 1 cup. And if you're resorting to this stuff, you can just measure it right out. But I really recommend that you at least zest a couple of limes to add complexity of flavor to your dish. If I'm using Persian limes, I buy 8 of them because 9 times out of 10, 8 limes is going to produce about a cup of liquid. For key limes, the bag that they sell usually yields about a cup of liquid, but that is a whole lot of these little guys to zest. So you're gonna zest your lime first and then squeeze it. For zesting, you must have a microplane. If you don't have a microplane, shame on you. You need a microplane. I'll link to one in the video description below if you want to grab it, but microplanes are very important for baking. Now, don't just haphazardly get in there and start sawing on these things. There is an efficient way to do this. The very best way to efficiently zest a lime and not drive yourself absolutely crazy and exhaust yourself and cause early onset of arthritis is this way. Take your microplane in your dominant hand, which for me is my right hand, and hold it by the actual cutting surface rather than by the handle. This gives you more strength and precision. And you hold the lime firmly in your non-dominant hand, and you're just going to make a gentle but deliberate stroke all the way down the lime, just like that. Notice you're not taking off all of the zest, but we've got a lot of limes to juice, so we've got way more zest than we actually need for the recipe. So just make passes like this down. Don't press too hard because you don't want to get the actual white pith. We just want to take off this fractionally thin layer on top. That is where the flavor and aroma is. So, now we've zested our lime, we've got plenty of delicious zest here, and we can move on to the next one. One of the reasons that I prefer Persian limes to key limes for this recipe is that zesting these little guys is much more tricky than zesting the larger Persian limes. It's actually easier to end up with a lot more skin than zest if you're not careful. You can certainly do it, but take it slow and realize your yield is going to be less. Super awkward, but it can be done. Needless to say, you should have washed your limes before you zest them. There's no telling what kind of creepy crawlies have been all over them in their 1,000+ mile journey to your supermarket. This is by far the most laborious part of this recipe. All right, I'm going to go ahead and slice and squeeze these just to see where we are at in terms of juice. Oh, and I'm also going to zest and juice this tiny itty-bitty Thai lime. It's not going to provide much flavor complexity because it's so small, but I guarantee you I will be able to taste it in there. If you are using key limes, you can squeeze almost 2, sometimes more than that, at a time inside your juicer. I definitely recommend a squeezer like this. It will allow you to get more juice out of each lime. And if citrus where you live is as expensive as citrus where I live, you want to eke out every single drop of juice you can from these babies because they are not cheap. These squeezers are not expensive at all. They will pay for themselves many times over by the time they break. These limes were super juicy, and so it looks like I sliced up one too many. That's why it's a good idea to start with less and then zest and juice more if you need to. Luckily, I'm making Brazilian caipirinha cocktails tonight, so I'll just use this later. Now, if your limes had seeds in them, which all key limes do, and some Persian limes do, you will want to strain that juice as you pour it into your blender. All right, next we are adding 4 ounces of sour cream, and that is about half of a cup. This just adds extra dairy richness in a way that you can't get from only using sweetened condensed milk. Next, we're adding about half a teaspoon of coarse salt or 1/4 of a teaspoon of table salt or fine sea salt. Next, about a teaspoon of vanilla. I just eyeball that. And finally, 4 egg yolks. Now, you'll find a lot of recipes out there that don't have eggs at all, and that's because officially this is supposed to be a no-bake icebox pie. But the oldest recipes did have eggs in them. They used the whites to make a meringue and the yolks to make the filling. And they did not cook the filling. The traditional filling is sweetened condensed milk, lime juice, and egg yolks, and it is left to set up on its own without the addition of any heat. And yes, it is true, you do not have to bake this pie in order for it to set up. It sets up a little bit better with baking, and if you were using factory-raised eggs that you get at the supermarket, it's always questionable whether or not those eggs might have pathogens inside of them because of the intensity in which the chickens are raised. They end up eating a lot of their poop. So, the smartest plan is to bake this pie. But why on earth does it set up without baking at all? Well, it turns out that acidity has a unique quality of denaturing proteins. In their natural state, proteins are wound together in a band. When you cook them, that band gets tighter and tighter and squeezes out any moisture that's inside of it. This is why meat dries out if it overcooks. But if we can denature those proteins, basically uncouple themselves from their tightly braided structure, they sort of fall apart into a gel. And that gel is better at holding on to moisture. When we wet brine or dry brine meat, we are denaturing the proteins inside of it using salt. But a similar thing can be done with acid. This is how lemon juice cooks ceviche. The acid unravels those protein structures, but they still want to get back together. They just can't get back in that perfect little braided form they used to have. So as they try to mash themselves back together, they hold on to moisture, basically forming a matrix or a gel. I had to get a little science in there. All right. We are going to gently blend this up, not too much because we don't want to incorporate too much air into the base. All right. And now we are going to just pour our base right into the crust. And you can give it a little rotating jiggle to kind of level it out. And now this is going to go into our 325-degree oven for 15 minutes only. Now we need to discuss meringue. The oldest published recipes we have for key lime pie use meringue as a topping. The only reason that meringue was invented in the first place is because people wanted a creamy topping on top of their desserts. But back in the days before not everybody had a refrigerator in their home, you could easily approximate a creamy topping using egg whites from the chickens in the backyard. Egg whites, sugar, a little vanilla, and suddenly you have something that's astonishingly like whipped cream. Then, of course, because meringue was common, they started finding all sorts of other uses for it, including candies and confections. I'm gonna be honest, folks, meringue creeps me out. I do not like it. But I recognize the fact that many of you do, and a traditional key lime pie does have meringue on top of it. The oldest recipes we have access to used a French meringue. That's basically just egg whites beaten with sugar, put on top of the pie, then the whole thing goes into the oven to bake until the meringue is set. But French meringues can be problematic. They can weep, they can pull moisture out of the air and start to get dribbly. But leaving a pie with a French meringue in the oven long enough for that meringue to set can result in the over-baking of your pie filling. You gotta bake it a long time before that meringue dehydrates and sets, and then it acts as an insulator on top of the pie so the pie does not cool down very quickly. So the old recipes are problematic. Italian meringue is a better choice because that meringue is actually cooked as it is beating with a hot sugar syrup. Then all you gotta do is put it on top of your pie, torch it with your kitchen torch, or stick it under the broiler for 30 seconds, and it's ready to go. But I just cannot get over destroying a beautiful key lime pie by putting meringue on top of it. So today we are going to use my super simple brown sugar sour cream, and I'm going to show you that after the pie is out of the oven and fully cooled. Now the surface is going to be a little bit jiggly when you pull it out. That's perfectly fine, don't worry about that. It's only been baking for about 15 minutes, which means it's going to cool off relatively quickly, but I do want it to cool off at least almost to room temperature before I put it into the refrigerator so that I'm not heating up my refrigerator needlessly. For it to have the proper texture, you want the pie to spend 2 or 3 hours at a minimum in the refrigerator before it's time to slice and serve. Our key lime pie is fully cooled and it is ready for a little bit of dressing up. Now, of course, we know that meringue is the traditional. Whipped cream is perfectly fine, even if you get the little squirty can. That's really the easiest thing to do. But my favorite creamy topping of choice is brown sugar sour cream. It's easier than whipping cream by hand. It has more flavor, it's richer, it's more delicious, and people always ask me, oh my gosh, what is this? This is so good. And it's just laughably easy. Now, I'm gonna be honest. For an everyday dessert, I just stir a little brown sugar and sour cream together with a splash of vanilla. I don't ever even measure it. Then I'll add it by the spoonful on top of whatever I'm topping it with. It's kind of liquidy, it runs off the side, but it tastes incredible and nobody complains. However, because we are pulling out the stops in presentation for this key lime pie, I'm actually gonna show you how to mix up an official batch of brown sugar sour cream with a little bit of a stabilizer so that we can pipe beautiful, decorative, creamy tuffets all around the edge of our pie. We're gonna start with 2 ounces or about 1/4 of a cup of brown sugar. Light or dark will work, but dark has more flavor, so I like it better. To that, I'm going to add about 1/2 teaspoon of instant clear gel. If you guys aren't familiar with this, it is a miracle. Professional pastry chefs live by this stuff. It's the same stuff that when you take a packet of instant pudding and you add milk to it and stir it around, it magically becomes pudding without having to cook it. This is basically a selected type of cornstarch that thickens as soon as it is moistened. So it gives you the luxury of adding stability to any liquidy base. I will link to this in the video description below because this should be in your pantry if it is not. I'm gonna put about 1/2 teaspoonful in with our sugar, and then I'm gonna stir that around. Next, I'm gonna add about 1 cup of sour cream. That's 8.5 ounces. And now I am gonna stir it around with a whisk to get that brown sugar evenly distributed throughout the sour cream. Now we need to give this a minute or two to sit to allow the brown sugar to dissolve into the sour cream. Right now it's sort of granular and we want the final mixture to be perfectly smooth. So I'm just gonna walk away for a couple minutes and then I'll be right back. A couple of minutes later the sugar is dissolved and now we can stir everything together. And at this point I also like to add a splash of vanilla. And you could also add some more lime zest, a little lime or lemon extract, or whatever flavorings you want. But just the brown sugar and vanilla makes this incredibly delicious. I'm gonna stir that in and make sure all of the brown sugar is evenly distributed. And now I'm gonna scrape this into a piping bag. Once it's in the bag, I like to give it about 5 minutes to allow the clear gel to sort of set, and then we'll pipe on our decor. I'm gonna unmold the pie now, so I'm just taking off the sides of the springform here and taking off that parchment. All right, now we are gonna take our piping bag and just go around giving ourselves some cute little bitty rosettes. And of course, we can do a few more. And how pretty is that? Now, this key lime pie is for a dinner party up at the top of the block that began, about 30 minutes ago. So I am going to be fashionably late. And I'm also not going to cut a piece of this right now because it's just bad juju to show up to a party with a pie that you've already tasted. I'll try to grab a little bit of footage of people at the party eating the pie and maybe get some of their feedback. But if not, I'll bring a piece home and we'll taste it later tonight.
Oh my God.
This is my favorite non-chocolate dessert.
Really?
Mm-hmm. No, está uma delícia. Tá. The next thing close to an orgasm.
I guess I'm just going to let my mother-in-law's comment end it there. Folks, that is key lime pie, the best way I know how to make it. For a printable version of this recipe, head over to my website, ultimatefoodgeek.com. I also have a link directly to the recipe in the video description below. If you just click where it says more, you can click right over to that recipe and print it out. If you have found this video at all helpful, I would appreciate you helping me out in return by clicking that subscribe button. I've got so much cool stuff coming your way. Thank you for spending some of your hard-earned time watching this video. I do appreciate it, folks. I'm Ben Starr, the Ultimate Food Geek. Thanks for watching.